The devil came to Copper Ridge wearing a shopkeeper's apron, and the first time I saw him, he was about to beat a child to death on his front porch. I should have done something right then, but I didn't. I just sat on my horse and watched, the cold October wind cutting right through my coat, feeling just as cold inside. And that single moment of cowardice, that hesitation, would almost cost us everything. My name is Lamont Ashcraft, and for 2 years, I'd been a ghost on my own land. My ranch, once full of life, was now just a hollowed-out collection of buildings echoing with memories of my wife, Bertie, and our boy. The fever took her, and a stupid accident took him, or so I was told. Now I rode to town telling myself it was for winter supplies, but the truth was uglier. I was running from the silence. Copper Ridge wasn't much, just a handful of wooden buildings huddled together against the coming storm, looking like they were praying for mercy. Outside Pennington's general store, I saw the girl. She couldn't have been more than 17 or 18, sweeping the boardwalk with a kind of mechanical terror. Every movement was too precise, too careful. It was the movement of a creature that had learned stillness was its only shield. Dark, ugly bruises, the color of a poisoned plum, painted her cheek. She moved stiffly, favoring her left side like she had cracked ribs. I knew the look. I'd seen it in cornered animals right before the trap sprung shut. "Velma, get a move on, girl." The voice that ripped through the air from inside the store was as harsh and unforgiving as a blizzard. "I ain't paying you to stand there dreaming." The girl, Velma, flinched so hard the broom nearly flew from her hands. Her knuckles went bone white. Then he appeared. Doyle Pennington. He was a man built of lean muscle and pure meanness, with eyes like chips of ice. He enjoyed his power. You could see it in the smug twist of his lips. "Are you deaf?" he snarled, and he raised his hand. The girl stumbled back, a tiny choked sound escaping her lips. "No, sir. Sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice so thin the wind stole it away. That's when I should have acted. But my own grief had me anchored, a dead weight in my own soul. I just watched. But something inside me, some old forgotten piece of the man I used to be, finally broke free. Before I knew what I was doing, my boots were hitting the boardwalk, each step a hammer blow. "Problem here, Doyle," I said. My voice sounded rusty, like an old gate hinge. Doyle turned, squinting against the gray light. "Ashcraft, didn't see you there." His eyes flickered with annoyance. A wolf interrupted during its meal. "I can see that," I said, my gaze dropping to Velma, to the map of pain on her face, to the way she was trying to make herself invisible. "This your daughter?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Stepdaughter," he spat, the word like a curse. "Her mother was my late wife. The girl's been nothing but a burden since the day she passed." He said it loud enough for the girl to hear, wanting her to hear it, wanting her to feel the sting. I looked at Velma's downcast eyes, the shame burning hot on her bruised cheeks. No child, no person, deserved to carry that kind of poison. "Seems to me she's working hard enough," I said, my voice low and even. Doyle's face went dark. "This ain't your concern, Ashcraft. She owes me. Room and board don't come free." I'd heard that line before. It was the excuse of every petty tyrant who got his kicks from torturing the powerless. "And how long you plan on collecting that debt?" I asked. Doyle gave a cruel little smile. "As long as it takes." That was it. That was the line. I turned my back on him, ignoring him completely, and spoke directly to the girl. "What's your name?" She flinched, startled that I was even talking to her. "Velma," she whispered, her eyes glued to the wooden planks. "You got anywhere else to go, Velma?" She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. My next words came out before I'd even thought them through. They felt like they belonged to another man, a better man. "You do now." The finality in my own voice surprised me. I turned back to Doyle, whose face was turning a blotchy, furious red. "Velma, go gather your things." Doyle stepped in front of me, puffing out his chest. "You can't just take her. She's my responsibility. The law says so." "You're what?" I let all the cold fury I'd been bearing for 2 years flood into my voice. I took a step closer, forcing him to look up at me. "She's a person, Doyle, not a piece of livestock you own. And if you think you can stop her from leaving, you're welcome to try me. Doyle was cruel, but he wasn't a fool. He knew my reputation in the valley. Fair, but hard. Not a man to be crossed lightly. He looked from my cold eyes to my hand, which was resting near the butt of my pistol. A long, tense moment passed. The wind howled. Finally, he stepped aside, his face a mask of hate. "This ain't over, Ashcraft," he muttered. I didn't bother to answer him. I just looked at Velma. "It's your choice," I said, my voice softer now. "Stay here, or come with me." For a second, she didn't move. She just stood there, trembling, caught between one monster she knew and a stranger she didn't. Then slowly, deliberately, she set the broom against the wall. She straightened her shoulders, a small but powerful act of defiance. "I'll come with you," she said, her voice clear and steady for the first time. She disappeared into the dark store and came back a moment later with a small, pathetic cloth bundle. Everything she owned in the entire world. As we rode out of Copper Ridge, the town felt like a bad dream fading behind us. Velma sat behind me on the horse, her grip on my coat so tight I could feel her knuckles through the thick wool. After a long time, she asked the question that was hanging in the air between us. Why? I didn't have a simple answer. Why does a man step into a fight that isn't his? Why does he risk his neck for a stranger? As my ranch came into view, nestled in the valley, I thought about it. Maybe I saw my own brokenness in her. Maybe I was just tired of watching the world burn. Or maybe, just maybe, it was simpler than that. Sometimes, I said, the words feeling heavy and true, a man sees something that ain't right, and he's got two choices: stand by and let it happen, or do something about it. I've spent too long standing by. The ranch house was just as I'd left it, clean but empty. It had the hollow feel of a place where laughter had gone to die. I showed Velma to the spare room, the one that used to be my son's. "Bed's got clean sheets," I mumbled, feeling awkward. "Wash basin there, privy's out back. You hungry?" She just nodded, her eyes wide as she took in the simple room, the first safe space she'd probably had in years. In the kitchen, I ladled some leftover stew into 2 bowls. We ate in silence, the only sound the rattling of the windows as the storm finally rolled in. The silence wasn't like the crushing quiet I was used to. It was different, shared. "This is good," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was my birdie's recipe," I heard myself say. The words just fell out. Consumption took her. 2 years back. Our boy, he died the year before that. A hunting accident. Why was I telling her this? A lifetime of keeping my own counsel, and here I was, spilling my guts to a half-starved girl I just met. Velma's eyes, which had been so full of fear, now filled with a deep, knowing sympathy. "I'm sorry," she said, and I knew she meant it. "Life takes what it takes," I said, more to myself than to her. "The only question is what you do after." That night, I sat by the fire, nursing a cup of coffee, and for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't alone in the house. I could hear the floorboards creak overhead, the soft sounds of another person breathing under my roof. From her room, I could hear faint, muffled crying. I didn't go to her. Some grief has to be washed away in private. But for the first time since I lost my family, the silence didn't feel like a tomb. It felt for just a moment a little like a home. But as I stared into the flames, a cold thought slithered into my mind. I hadn't just saved a girl from a beating. I had stolen property from a man like Doyle Pennington. And men like Doyle don't just forget. They don't forgive. They get even. I hadn't ended her problem. I had just made it my own, and it was a hell of a lot bigger than I realized. Dawn broke pale and gray over the mountains. I woke to a sound I hadn't heard in years. Someone else moving around in my kitchen. Quiet, careful movements, like someone trying their best not to be a burden. I found Velma at the big cast-iron stove, struggling to light a fire. She had changed into a different dress, just as worn as the first, and her hair was braided neatly down her back. She looked cleaner, but somehow more fragile in the morning light. "That old stove's got a temper," I said from the doorway. She jumped, spinning around with a little gasp, her hand flying to her chest. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Nothing to be sorry for," I cut her off gently. I walked over and adjusted the damper, adding a bit of dry kindling. takes a particular touch. Bertie always said I was the only one who could make it behave. Soon the smell of coffee started to fill the small kitchen, chasing away some of the morning chill. I watched Velma as she watched my hands, her focus so intense it was almost unnerving. "You're studying me like a hawk studies a field mouse," I observed. A faint blush rose on her bruised cheek. I, I want to learn," she said. "I want to be useful." Those words hit me harder than I expected. "You're useful just by being here," I said, and the truth of it surprised me. This house has been too quiet for too long. We ate breakfast in a comfortable silence, and I laid out the day's chores. The vegetable garden was a mess of weeds, needed clearing before the first hard frost. The chicken coop needed fresh straw. There was a section of fence down by the creek that needed mending, and the woodpile was getting low. "I can help," she said, her voice filled with a desperate eagerness. "I can do all of it." I looked at her, at the fierce determination in her eyes, warring with the deep exhaustion that still clung to her like a shroud. "The garden is probably the best place to start," I said. "But you work at your own pace. Your body's still healing." Her hand went instinctively to her ribs, a motion she quickly suppressed. "I'm fine," she insisted. "Healing and being fine ain't the same thing," I told her. We worked through the morning, a strange and silent team. I split logs with the steady rhythmic swing of the axe, the familiar work a comfort. Velma tackled the overgrown garden. She moved slowly at first, testing her limits, her movements still cautious. But as the sun climbed higher, a change came over her. Her hands, though calloused and scraped, moved with a surprising confidence among the withered plants. She seemed to know what to pull and what to save, her touch gentle but firm. It was deeply satisfying, watching her bring order to the chaos, coaxing life back into that neglected patch of earth. She even seemed to be talking to the plants, whispering to them as she worked. "You've done this before," I said during our noon break, as we sat on the porch steps with bread and cheese. "My mother had a garden," she said, her eyes distant. Before she Before she married Doyle, she taught me everything. She used to say that plants are a lot like folks. They just need the right conditions to thrive." Her voice was soft, laced with a sadness that felt ancient. "What happened to your mother?" I asked, treading carefully. Velma's face clouded over. "Doyle said it was a fever, but she was getting better." "I know she was." She shrugged, a gesture heavy with unspoken accusations and a grief too deep for words. A cold, hard knot of anger formed in my gut. I knew men like Doyle, men who were like a blight, poisoning everything they touched. "She sounded like a good woman," I said. "She used to say a garden is hope made visible," Velma whispered. "That every seed you plant is a promise that tomorrow will come." We worked side by side that afternoon, mending the fence down by the creek. As the day wore on, I saw the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. The rigid caution in her posture softened. Once a soft, humming melody drifted over to me from where she was working. It was a simple, sad tune, but it was the first music that had graced this ranch in 2 years. She stopped abruptly when she realized I was listening, the color flooding her cheeks again. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "Don't stop," I said quickly. "Please, it's a good sound." "My mother taught me that one," she said quietly. "She said music makes the work lighter." "Your mother was a wise woman." That evening after dinner, as we sat on the porch watching the stars begin to prick the deep purple sky, I found myself explaining the secrets of the old coffee pot, the quirks of the stove, how to bank the fire so it would last the night. She soaked it all up like dry ground drinks rain. "You don't have to learn everything in one day," I told her. "I want to earn my keep," she insisted, her jaw set. I turned and really looked at her profile lit by the warm glow of the lamp from the window. "Velma, look at me." She met my gaze, her own eyes uncertain. "You don't owe me anything. You're not my worker. You're not paying off some debt. You are here because no human being should have to live the way you were living." A tear traced a clean path through the dust on her cheek. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why do you care?" I didn't have a quick answer. I looked out at the vast, dark expanse of the mountains. "Maybe," I said slowly, "it's because I know what it feels like to be powerless. When Bertie got sick, when my boy died, there was nothing I could do to stop it. I couldn't protect them, but I can protect you." Her breath hitched and her eyes shimmered in the lamplight. "I'd forgotten what it feels like to be safe," she confessed. "Then we'll just have to help you remember," I said. That night, as I lay in my bed, listening to the quiet sounds of another person in my home, I felt a flicker of something I thought was long dead. Peace. But as I drifted off to sleep, a new and unsettling thought surfaced. Velma had said her mother was getting better before she died, and she'd said it with a chilling certainty. Doyle hadn't just beaten his stepdaughter. I was beginning to suspect he was capable of something far, far worse, and that he wanted Velma back not just for room and board, but to make sure a terrible secret stayed buried forever. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of a quiet, peaceful routine that felt both strange and deeply natural. Velma's bruises faded from purple to a sickly yellow and then disappeared altogether. The haunted, hunted look in her eyes was slowly being replaced by a cautious curiosity. She smiled more. Sometimes I'd even hear her humming that sad little tune in the garden, which was now thriving under her care. I taught her how to handle a rifle, how to track a deer, how to read the sky for a coming storm. And she taught me what it felt like to have a purpose again, beyond just surviving another day. It was good, too good to last. I was in the barn trying to fix a broken axle on the wagon when I heard them. The sound of multiple horses moving fast, moving with an urgency that meant trouble. I straightened up, my hand going instinctively for the rifle I always kept propped against the barn wall. Sheriff Verlon Strickland rode into my yard like he owned the place. He had 2 deputies with him, both of them with the same smug, cruel look as their boss. Verlon was Doyle Pennington's cousin, a fact that explained a lot about how Doyle got away with his particular brand of evil. The man wore his badge like a crown, and his smile held all the warmth of a snake. "Ashcraft," he called out, not even bothering to dismount. His horse danced nervously underneath him. "We need a word." "About what, Verlon?" I asked, my voice flat. I didn't move from the barn doorway. "About the girl," he said, his smile widening. "The one you kidnapped from my cousin?" The word hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. "Kidnapped," I repeated slowly. That's an interesting way to describe offering someone a safe place to live. "The girl is a minor," Verlon said, his tone dripping with false authority. "She's under the legal guardianship of her stepfather, Doyle Pennington. Taking her against his will is a crime. She's 18, Verlon. She made her own choice." "You got proof of her age?" He shot back and his eyes glinted. He knew I didn't. "Because Doyle has papers, official papers. Says she's 17. That makes her his legal responsibility until she comes of age next year." A block of ice formed in my stomach. Of course he had papers. Men like Doyle always had papers. They knew how to twist the law into a weapon. "Where is she, Ashcraft?" Verlon's voice hardened. "Bring her out. We can discuss this reasonably." "There's nothing to discuss," I said. "You're not taking her." "I'm talking about her return to her legal guardian," he said, emphasizing the words. Just then, Velma appeared in the barn doorway behind me. She was holding the small .22 rifle I'd been teaching her to use. It looked ridiculously large in her hands, but she held it with a steady purpose that sent a jolt of pride through me. Whatever else happened, the terrified girl sweeping the porch was gone for good. Velma Stoddard was nobody's victim anymore. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the yard with the force of a shout. Verlon's eyes locked onto the rifle in her hands. "Now, girl, you don't want to do something stupid." "The only stupid thing I ever did," she replied, her voice gaining strength, "was staying with that man for as long as I did. He is not my guardian. He is my monster." "The law is the law," Verlon sneered. "Whose law?" I stepped forward, putting myself between him and Velma. "The kind of law that lets a man beat a girl half to death and calls it discipline." "You got any proof of that abuse, Ashcraft?" Verlon challenged. "Besides the word of a runaway?" "Look at her," I said, gesturing back towards Velma. "Look at what he did to her." Verlon gave a dismissive snort. "I see a girl who probably fell down some stairs. Clumsy types, young women, always hurting themselves. The casual, deliberate cruelty of that statement, the way he erased her suffering with a wave of his hand, sent a white-hot rage searing through me. My hand tightened on my rifle stock. "Easy, Ashcraft," Verlon warned, his own hand drifting down towards his Colt. "No need for this to get messy. Just hand over the girl." "Not happening. Then I'll have to place you under arrest for kidnapping and harboring a fugitive minor." "You can try," I said, my voice dangerously low. The standoff stretched, the air so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife. I could feel Velma's fear and resolve behind me, a strange and powerful combination. I could see the deputy's itchy trigger fingers. One wrong move, one twitch, and my yard would be soaked in blood. Finally, Verlon seemed to decide it wasn't a fight he could win today. He reined his horse around, his face a thundercloud of fury. "This ain't over," he snarled. "Doyle's got rights, and I aim to see them protected." I watched them gallop away, disappearing over the ridge, before I finally allowed myself to lower my rifle. I turned to Velma. Her face was pale, but her eyes were blazing. "You all right?" I asked. She gave a shaky nod, her knuckles still white where she gripped the little rifle. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I looked out at the empty yard, at the hoof prints tearing up the dirt. Verlon's threat wasn't an empty one. They'd be back. "Now," I said, my mind already racing, "we prepare. Because next time they come, they won't be asking so nicely." That night I didn't just feel like I was protecting a runaway. I felt like a man standing on the edge of a war. But as I watched Velma meticulously clean her rifle at the kitchen table, her movements precise and determined, I realized something new. Doyle and Verlon didn't just want a girl back. They were terrified of her. What did she know? What had she seen that made them so desperate to silence her? The thought sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the coming winter. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with an old inkwell and a stack of paper. For 2 years, I'd cut myself off from the world, from the men I once called friends. Now I was reaching out, calling in debts I never thought I'd have to collect. Velma sat across from me, the lamplight catching the focused look on her face as she carefully oiled the parts of the small pistol I had given her. The Rushla 22 was good for practice, but if real trouble came, she'd need something with more stopping power. "Who are you writing to?" she asked, her voice quiet. "People," I said, dipping my pen. "People who understand that sometimes the law and justice are two completely different things." I signed a letter and set it aside to dry. "Alton Brewster. Fought with me in the war. Man's a mountain and just as stubborn. He owes me. Eva Morrison. They call her Silent Eva. Half Cherokee tracker. She can move through these mountains like smoke and read a trail a week old. Her brother got himself on the wrong side of Verlin Strickland and ended up dead. The official story was resisting arrest. Iva knows better. Dorotha Winburn. Runs the boarding house in town. A widow. Verlon and Doyle tried to swindle her out of her property a few years back. I helped her sort it out. She has no love for the Penningtons." Velma was watching me, her eyes wide. "You think they'll help?" "I know they will," I said, looking up at her. "When good people see a wrong that needs righting, they stand up. And if they don't, well, we'll handle it ourselves." But as I sealed the last letter, I knew this wasn't just about standing up for what was right anymore. This was about survival. The replies came faster than I expected, carried by riders who knew how to be discreet. Alton arrived first, thundering into the yard on a horse that looked almost too small for him. He was a giant of a man, with a wild gray beard and arms as thick as tree limbs. Scars from old battles crisscrossed his face. "Heard you got yourself some woman trouble, Lamont," he boomed, swinging down from his horse with a groan. "Not woman trouble, Alton. Trouble with men who think women are property." He clapped me on the shoulder, nearly driving me into the ground. "Same difference," he grinned. "What do you need me to do?" Eva Morrison came next, arriving so silently I didn't even know she was there until she was standing on the porch. She was a small, wiry woman with eyes that missed nothing. She nodded once to me, and her gaze settled on Velma for a long moment. It wasn't a threatening look. It was an assessment. A flicker of something, maybe approval, passed through her dark eyes before she turned back to me. She didn't need to speak. Her presence was her answer. Dorothy Winburn, a stern-looking woman with her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, closed her boarding house for a week and rode up with a wagon full of supplies and information. Verlon's been asking questions all over town, she reported, her voice sharp. Wants to know who's been buying extra ammunition, who's been sending letters out. The man spooked. Good, I said. Spooked men make mistakes. By the end of the week, a small, unlikely band had gathered at my ranch. 8 of us in total. Not an army of soldiers, but something far more dangerous. A collection of quiet, capable people who had been pushed too far, people with nothing left to lose, and a deep-seated desire to protect one of their own. Velma watched them, her initial fear giving way to a wide-eyed fascination. These weren't the broken, shuffling men she was used to seeing in Copper Ridge. These were people who looked you square in the eye, people who had chosen to be here, to stand with us, simply because they believed it was the right thing to do. You're building an army, she said to me one evening, as we watched Alton teaching her how to sight down a heavier rifle. No, I corrected her gently. I'm building a family. An army fights for orders. A family fights for each other. The distinction was important, and I could see in her eyes that she understood it. This was something she had never had, something she probably never dreamed was possible. A family that chose you, that would risk everything for you. What if Doyle brings more men? She asked, a flicker of her old fear returning. Then we'll deal with more men, I said, my voice full of a calm certainty I didn't entirely feel. But I don't think it'll come to that. Bullies like Doyle, they count on 2 things, fear and isolation. They want you to think you're alone. When they see they're outnumbered, that their victim has people who will fight back, they usually go looking for someone weaker to pick on. I hoped I was right, but a knot of dread in my gut told me that Doyle Pennington wasn't the type to back down. He wasn't just a bully. He was a man with a dark secret, and he would burn the whole world down to keep it. My gut was right. 3 nights later, the world did begin to burn. I was ripped from a deep sleep by the acrid smell of smoke, and Alton's voice shouting my name, an urgent, terrifying alarm. I rolled out of bed, grabbing my rifle and my pants in one motion, and burst out of the house into a nightmare. The barn, my barn, the one my father and I had built with our own hands, was engulfed in flames, a roaring monster of orange and red against the black night sky. How bad is it? I yelled to Alton, who was already organizing a frantic bucket brigade from the well. The heat was so intense it felt like it was peeling the skin from my face. Could have been worse, he shouted back over the roar of the fire. Iva saw them coming, gave us a warning. We got most of the animals out. I stood there for a second, watching the flames lick the sky, watching the structure that held so many of my memories turn to ash. This was Doyle's answer. This was his message. If he couldn't take Velma back with the flimsy shield of the law, he would try to destroy my life, piece by piece, until I had nothing left. Any casualties? I managed to ask. Just pride and timber, a calm voice said from beside me. Eva emerged from the billowing smoke, her face smudged with soot, but her eyes clear and sharp. They were sloppy, in a hurry, but they left something. She held out a piece of singed paper. The heat from it warmed my hand. The message was short, scrawled in charcoal. No signature was needed. Give us the girl or lose everything. Velma was suddenly at my side, her face a mask of anguish and guilt, illuminated by the hellish light of the fire. This is my fault, she whispered, her voice cracking. No, I said, my voice hard as stone. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. This is not your fault. This is their choice. They chose this. They chose violence over the law, cruelty over decency. This is on them, Velma. All of them. But if I went back, you'd be dead within a year, I cut her off, my grip tightening. Maybe they'd do it quick. Maybe they'd do it slow, but they would destroy you. I will not let that happen. She stared at the burning barn, at the smoldering ruins of my past, and I saw the last of her fear burn away in the fire, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that mirrored my own. Then what do we do? She asked. I looked around at my small family of outcasts, their faces grim and determined in the flickering firelight. Alton, Eva, Dorotha, and the others. Scarred people, but not broken. We had lost the barn, but we were all alive. Doyle had escalated things, but in doing so, he had also shown his hand. He was desperate, and desperation leads to mistakes. Now, I said, my voice low and dangerous, a promise of retribution. We stop playing defense. Now we take the fight to them. Alton's face split into a fierce grin, the firelight dancing in his eyes. About damn time, he growled. The first battle was over. The war had just begun. They came at dawn, not with the stealth of night raiders, but with the arrogance of conquerors. It was a show of force meant to terrify us into submission. 20 riders, maybe more, cresting the ridge and spreading out in a long, intimidating line. At their head were two men, Sheriff Verlin Strickland, looking smug and triumphant, and a stranger. This new man was dressed in a fine city coat and wore the gleaming silver star of a U.S. federal marshal on his chest. I watched them from behind the reinforced fence posts Alton and Eva had spent the last 2 days setting up. The smoking ruins of the barn served as a grim backdrop, a constant reminder of the stakes. But it had also served as a rallying cry. Word of the fire and who had set it had spread through the valley. A few more neighbors, men and women who had their own grievances with the Penningtons, had trickled in during the night, armed and ready. Our numbers had grown. Lamont Ashcraft! The federal marshal's voice boomed across the yard, sharp and authoritative. I am Marshal Cornelius Hartwell. I have a warrant for your arrest. On what charges? I called back, my rifle resting comfortably in the crook of my arm. Kidnapping, harboring a fugitive, obstruction of justice, and assault on a lawman. I suppose Doyle Pennington swore out those charges, I said, my voice laced with contempt. A concerned legal guardian has rights under territorial law, Mr. Ashcraft, Hartwell declared. Rights don't include beating a young woman bloody, I yelled back. The marshal consulted a sheaf of papers he held in his gloved hand. I see no mention of abuse in the official complaint. All I see is a concerned stepfather wishing for the safe return of his ward. It was a lie, a neat, tidy, legal lie, and this marshal was here to enforce it. Just then, Velma stepped up beside me, her own rifle held steady. The transformation was breathtaking. The broken, terrified girl from Pennington's porch was gone, replaced by this fierce, confident woman who stood tall, who knew her own worth and refused to let anyone take it from her again. I am not his daughter, she called out, her voice clear and ringing with conviction. I am not his property, and I am not going anywhere. The marshal's face softened into a look of patronizing pity. Miss Stoddard, you're young. You're clearly confused. These people have filled your head with lies and turned you against your own family. Come with us now, and we can sort all of this out properly. I know the difference between truth and lies, Marshal, Velma shot back, her voice like flint. I know the difference between protection and abuse, and I know which side of this fence represents which. Verlon Strickland spurred his horse forward, his patience clearly gone. Enough of this talk. We're taking the girl, and anyone who gets in the way will answer to federal authority. Federal authority, backed by local corruption, Alton boomed from his position by the chicken coop. How much is Doyle paying you for that shiny star, Marshal? Hartwell's face darkened with fury. That's slander, you old goat. It's the truth, Eva's voice said, seeming to come from nowhere. She materialized from behind a large boulder near the creek, her rifle trained squarely on the marshal's chest. I saw you meeting with Doyle and Verlin outside of town 2 nights ago. Saw the money change hands. The standoff stretched taut, the air crackling with imminent violence. There 20 men against our dozen or so, but we had the better positions. We had the high ground, and we were fighting for something more than a paycheck. Last chance, Ashcraft, Verlin snarled, his hand hovering over the butt of his pistol. Give us the girl, or we'll take her. I felt Velma tense beside me. This was it, the moment it all came down to. The choice was simple and terrible. Surrender her and let Doyle extinguish the bright flame she had become, or fight and risk everyone and everything I had left. It wasn't really a choice at all. No, I said, the single word echoing in the sudden silence. The first shot didn't come from their side. It came from Velma. She didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. She saw one of the deputies raising his rifle and she fired. The crack of her small gun was the signal that unleashed hell. I shoved her down behind a watering trough as a hail of bullets splintered the air where we had been standing. "Stay down!" I yelled over the deafening roar of gunfire. "Like hell!" she shouted back. She rose up just enough to sight down her barrel and squeeze off another shot, sending one of the attackers scrambling for cover, clutching his arm. The battle raged, a chaotic storm of smoke, noise, and fear. It probably only lasted a few minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. When the gunfire finally subsided, Verlon Strickland lay dead in the middle of my yard, a look of surprise frozen on his face. Marshall Hartwell was on the ground, clutching a bleeding shoulder, his gun arm useless. And Doyle Pennington? The man who started it all was nowhere to be seen. He'd vanished. The coward had run at the first sign of a real fight. "Anyone hurt?" I called out, my voice hoarse. "Dortha took a graze on her arm," Alton reported. "Nothing serious. We're good." I rose slowly, my rifle still at the ready. The surviving attackers were backing away, their appetite for the fight completely gone. Hartwell glared at us from the ground, his face pale with pain and shock. "This isn't over, Ashcraft. You'll hang for this." "Yes, it is," a clear voice said. Velma stepped out from behind the trough, walking slowly toward the wounded marshal. She stood over him, her rifle held loosely at her side, her shadow falling across his face. "It's over, because you came here to enforce a lie. And the next time any lawman comes to this ranch, they had better bring the truth with them. Or they had better bring an army." Hartwell looked up at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He saw what I saw. This wasn't a confused child. This was a woman forged in fire, a woman who had found her strength and would die before she gave it up again. "Get off my land," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of finality. "All of you, take your dead and your wounded and get out. And you can tell Doyle Pennington that if he ever shows his cowardly face in this valley again, he'll be joining his cousin in the dirt." They left, a sorry, defeated procession. I watched them go, feeling the crushing weight on my chest finally begin to lift. Is it really over?" Velma asked, her voice trembling now that the danger had passed. I looked at this fierce, brave, incredible young woman who had become my daughter in every single way that mattered. "The fighting might be," I said, putting my arm around her shaking shoulders. "But the living, that's just getting started." But even as I said it, a cold dread returned. Doyle was still out there. We had won the battle, but he held a secret about Velma's mother, a secret he would kill to protect. And now we had made him even more desperate. The war wasn't over. It had just gone silent. Winter descended on the valley early that year, a heavy blanket of snow that muffled the world in a pristine, fragile silence. We rebuilt the barn, stronger than before, with the help of Alton and our other neighbors. The bullet holes in the fence posts remained, grim reminders of the price of our freedom. The weeks after the shootout were tense. A real U.S. Marshal came through, a tired-looking man with honest eyes. He took statements from everyone. Hartwell, the imposter, had confessed everything. He was a hired gun from back east, paid handsomely by Doyle to provide a veneer of federal authority. With Hartwell's testimony and the accounts from Dorotha and others about years of corruption under Sheriff Verlin, the whole rotten structure of the Pennington's power in Copper Ridge began to collapse. Doyle Pennington was now a wanted man, for conspiracy, for arson, and now, with the new evidence we provided, for the murder of his wife, Martha Stoddard. But he had vanished like a ghost in the wind. Life at the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Velma, who had once moved with the caution of a frightened mouse, now moved with a purpose that filled every corner of the house. She wasn't just helping, she was becoming a partner. She stood beside me in the kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, as she kneaded bread dough, the movements now second nature. I found a small locked chest in the back of Bertie's closet, something I hadn't been able to bring myself to open. Inside were her books, poetry, botany, even philosophy. Velma's eyes lit up when she saw them. Every evening, after the chores were done, we would sit by the fire. I would read to her, and she would practice her letters, her brow furrowed in concentration. The house that had been a tomb of memories was now a school, a home, a sanctuary. Alton and Iva are heading back to their own places come spring. I mentioned one evening, watching the firelight dance in her hair. She looked up from the book she was puzzling over, and I saw a shadow of sadness in her eyes. The people who had fought for her had become her family, the first real ones she'd ever known. Will we see them again? Every summer for the roundup, I promised, and any time we need them, or they need us. Some bonds they don't break with distance. She nodded, a quiet understanding passing between us. She was learning about bonds, not the chains of duty and fear that had held her to Doyle, but the freely chosen ties of loyalty, respect, and love that now bound us all together. I've been thinking, she said one night, her voice careful, about what comes next. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? I want to learn more than just reading, she said, her gaze steady and serious. I want to learn the books for the ranch, how to manage the accounts, how to judge cattle prices, how to plan for the seasons. She took a deep breath. I want to be useful, really useful, not just someone you took in out of kindness. I put down my coffee cup and turned to face her fully. Velma, listen to me, I said, my voice thick with an emotion that surprised me. You have never been just someone I took in. You brought this place back to life. You brought me back to life. You reminded me what it means to have a family. But I'm not really your daughter, she whispered, the words barely audible. The hell you're not, I said, my voice rough but certain. Blood doesn't make a family. Choice does. Commitment does. Love does. By every single one of those measures, you are my daughter, as surely as if Bertie had borne you herself. Tears welled in her eyes, the tears she had held back for so long. They were not tears of sadness or fear, but of release. For all the dark, lonely years with Doyle, she must have dreamed of hearing words like those, never daring to believe they could be real. I love you too, she finally whispered, the word hanging in the warm air between us, full of weight and meaning, and a future I never thought I'd have. Pa. I felt my own eyes sting. A smile spread across my face, the first real, unguarded smile in years. Well then, I said, my voice a little shaky, I reckon we'd better get started on your education. Can't have my daughter running this ranch without knowing everything there is to know. We spent the rest of the winter not as a guardian and a ward, but as a father and a daughter, as partners. We pored over ledgers and almanacs. I taught her everything I knew about the land, the animals, the rhythm of the seasons, and she taught me how to hope again. But as the snows began to melt, a shadow lingered. Doyle was still out there. A man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man of all. We had found peace, but I knew, deep in my bones, that we would have to fight for it one last time. He wouldn't just let us be. He would come back to destroy the new life we had so carefully, so lovingly, built from the ashes of the old one. He would come back for Velma. The spring thaw came, turning the valley into a muddy, vibrant mess of new life. The threat of Doyle felt like a distant storm cloud, always on the horizon, but never breaking. We worked the ranch, our days falling into a comfortable routine. Velma took to the business side of things with a ferocious intelligence, her mind as sharp as any man's I'd ever known. She wasn't just my daughter, she was my right hand. The official adoption papers came through from the territorial capital. Velma Stoddard was now legally Velma Ashcraft. We didn't have a celebration. We just read the document together at the kitchen table, a quiet acknowledgement of what we both already knew to be true in our hearts. One afternoon in late April, I was repairing the corral gate when Eva Morrison appeared. She didn't ride into the yard. One moment the woods were empty, the next she was standing there, a ghost in the dappled sunlight. My stomach tightened into a cold knot. Eva never paid social calls. He's back, she said without preamble. Spotted his trail 3 days ago, coming up from the south. He's not alone. 3 others with him. They're moving carefully, staying off the main roads. Doyle, I said. It wasn't a question. She just nodded. Where is he now? Holed up in the old miner's cabin on Shadow Peak, watching us. The peace we had built was a fragile illusion, and it had just been shattered. Thank you, Iva. Alton's on his way, she said. He'll be here by nightfall. Dorothy knows. She's keeping an eye on who comes and goes in town. Eva faded back into the trees as silently as she had appeared. I walked back to the house, my mind racing. Velma was on the porch, mending one of my old shirts. She looked up as I approached, and she knew instantly. The fear was back in her eyes, but this time it was tempered with steel. "He's here, isn't he?" she asked. I nodded. Eva found his trail. He's watching the ranch. She put down the shirt, her hands folding neatly in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just looked at me, her gaze unwavering. "We knew he would come back," she said. "Yes." "He won't take me," she said, her voice a low, fierce promise. "And he won't destroy this. He won't destroy our home." That night, with Alton sitting at our table, a plan was formed. We weren't going to wait for him to attack. We weren't going to turn our home into a fortress again. We had been on the defensive for too long. This time, we would be the hunters. The next morning, before the sun had even touched the highest peaks, Alton and I rode out. We made a show of it, heading north, as if we were checking the fences on the far side of the property. Velma was left at the ranch with Iva, who was hidden somewhere in the trees, a silent guardian angel with a rifle. It was a decoy, a lie. Once we were out of sight of the ranch, we circled back, using the cover of the dense forest to approach Shadow Peak from the east, from the sheer cliff face side nobody ever used. It was a hard, dangerous climb, but Iva had assured us it was possible. We left the horses tethered in a hidden ravine and began our ascent on foot. Hours later, exhausted and bleeding from a dozen scrapes, we pulled ourselves onto the ridge just below the old cabin. We could smell their campfire smoke. We crept forward, moving from boulder to boulder until we could see them. 4 men, dirty and mean-looking, huddled around a fire, and one of them was Doyle. He looked different, thinner, his face gaunt and bearded, but the same cold, dead eyes. They were planning. Their voices drifted down to us on the wind. They were going to wait another day, then hit the ranch at night, burn the house this time, and take Velma. Doyle spoke of her not as a person, but as a key. "She's the only one who knows where her mother hid it," he snarled. "The deed, the real deed to the old silver claim. It's worth a fortune. Once I have that, we can disappear." So that was it. Not just revenge, not just silencing a witness. Greed. It was always greed. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind us. We spun around, rifles raised. It was Velma. My heart nearly stopped. "What in God's name are you doing here?" I hissed, pulling her down behind the rocks. She was breathing hard, her face flushed from the climb. Iva was right behind her. "I couldn't just wait," Velma said, her eyes blazing. "This is my fight, too. More than anyone's." Before I could argue, Eva put a hand on my arm. Her eyes were fixed on the cabin. "They heard something," she whispered. The men by the fire had gone silent, their heads up, listening. One of them picked up his rifle and started walking towards the edge of the ridge, towards our hiding place. There was no more time for planning. Alton looked at me and nodded. It was now or never. I looked at Velma, at the rifle she held clutched in her hands. I saw the fear, but I also saw the iron resolve. This was her moment. This was where she finally, truly took her life back. "You ready for this?" I whispered. "I've been ready for a long time," she whispered back. As the man got closer, Doyle shouted at him. "See anything?" "Probably just a rock slide, boss," the man called back. He was 10 feet from us. I gave the signal. We rose as one. "Pennington!" I yelled. The surprise was total. Before they could even react, Alton's rifle cracked, and the man closest to us went down. The other 2 scrambled for their guns, but Ivan and I were faster. 2 more shots echoed through the mountains. 2 more men fell. Doyle was left standing alone, his face a mask of pure shock and terror. He fumbled for his pistol, but before he could draw it, another shot rang out. Not from my rifle or Alton's or Iva's. It was the sharp crack of Velma's. 22. The pistol flew from Doyle's hand as the bullet slammed into his wrist. He screamed, a high, thin sound of pain and fury, clutching his shattered hand. He stared at Velma, who was now walking towards him, her rifle still raised, her face cold and impassive. "It's over, Doyle," she said. He backed away, his eyes wide with disbelief and fear. You little..." He never finished the sentence. His heel caught on a loose rock. He stumbled backward, his arms flailing wildly for balance. For a horrifying moment, he teetered on the very edge of the cliff. His eyes met Velma's, and in them, she must have seen the reflection of all the years of pain, all the fear, all the cruelty. She didn't move. She didn't lower her rifle. She just watched. And then, with a final, choked cry, Doyle Pennington fell. We listened in silence until the sound was gone. The walk back down the mountain was quiet. We found the deed to the silver claim hidden in Doyle's saddlebags. It was, as he'd said, worth a fortune. More than enough to secure the ranch and Velma's future for the rest of their lives. When we got back to the ranch, Velma walked to the small garden she had so carefully tended. She knelt in the dirt, the deed clutched in her hand, and for the first time since that day on the porch, she wept. She cried for her mother, for the childhood she had lost, and for the monster who was finally gone. They were tears of grief, but also for the first time, tears of freedom. 5 years later, I stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun rise over the mountains. The valley was prosperous. The silver from the claim had allowed us to expand, to build, to help our neighbors. Copper Ridge was a different place, a better place, without the shadow of the Penningtons hanging over it. Velma Ashcraft stood beside me. She was a woman now, confident and strong, respected throughout the territory for her sharp mind and her kind heart. She ran the ranch with me, my equal in all things. She never married, though many men had tried to court her. She said she had found her family, and that was enough. She had taken her mother's lessons to heart. She had planted seeds of hope in the most barren soil, and she had created a garden more beautiful than either of us could have ever imagined. She was proof that the strongest bonds aren't forged by blood or law, but by choice, by love, by the simple, powerful act of seeing someone who is broken and choosing not to look away. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't safety or shelter. It's giving them a reason to fight for themselves and then standing beside them while they win. The wind still howled across our valley, carrying the scent of pine and promise, but now it would always sound like freedom. It would always sound like home. What part of Velma's journey hit you the hardest? Was it the moment she stood up to the sheriff, or the final confrontation with Doyle on that cliff? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and if this story moved you, and you're new here, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. We're building a community here, and we'd be honored to have you join us. For everyone returning, thank you for being on this journey with us. We'll see you in the next one.